A company says it's 90% water positive. It sounds like a solved problem. Use water here, put the same amount back somewhere else. But what if that project sits on the other side of the world from where the water was actually taken? Right now, nothing requires the offset to touch the same river, the same aquifer, or the same community that felt the shortage. I'm Susan Springsteen, and this is The Leak in the System. Nathan Barasa spent years inside this exact problem, first at IBM, then running water accounting for Amazon Web Services before he left to build something different. In 2025, he founded Blue Credit, a marketplace built to make water credits transparent and local, instead of the bespoke, closed-door deals that largely define the industry today. Hello, Nathan. Welcome to The Leak in the System. You and I met because we're both water warriors, and we both have a big mission on being wise water stewards in the water space. And so I'm delighted to have you on the show.
Thanks, Susan. It's really nice to see you. Thanks for having me on the podcast and the show.
A lot of our listeners have never heard of a water credit. So can you, in your own words, tell us sort of water credit 101?
Water consumption is offset through what I'll call bespoke water credit contracts between tech firms, industrial water consumers, and watershed developers like the Nature Conservancy and other watershed-related groups that work on interventions to either return water into the environment or to save water. Those contracts are very specific in the sense that they basically provide a offset scheme for water withdrawals that these companies use. So today, if you looked at, for instance, any one of your big tech firms or any one of your big beverage companies or any one of your big textile companies, they've taken water offset goals or what they call water positive goals to offset their own water consumption before a certain time period, be it 2030 or 2050. So the idea there is basically you consume water for industrial water use, whether that's for cooling or for processing, and then you do watershed-related projects to offset that consumption. And those projects could be anything from improving efficiency within your operation, working on leak detection either at the system or at the building level, watershed replenishment, that's improving watershed health through stream restoration or wetland restoration, or reusing water or using alternative sources of water. Ultimately, what you end up with is a volumetric water benefit, which is how much water you're putting back or saving into the environment over a period of time. And then you use that offset to basically deduct from your own water consumption. Now, that mechanism works, but as it is implemented today, it's not transparent. So we don't actually know what the exact pricing on those water offsets are. There's no transparency, particularly on the basin level. It's not regulated. So what we did was we first developed intellectual property around how you build that marketplace or mechanism, but also started to build up the platform so that you have an actual open marketplace for the trading of watershed replenishment or water-related credits.
To oversimplify, water credits work like an IOU. You can use water here, then fund a project somewhere else to put the same amount back. It sounds new, but the logic isn't.
So interestingly, the thinking around water offsetting, I think, directly came from the carbon markets industry. Water credits, however, water offsets are a relatively new idea or offset category. Couple of things. So the first is an offset tells you how much someone is consuming. So if I'm able to quantify how much someone is targeting to offset, I can also basically abstract how much they're using, how much water consumption they're using. And sometimes that number can be proprietary because it tells a lot else about the business and where they're doing business and how they're doing business. The second, and I think even more important, is the transparency of water consumption. So for an offset to make sense, an offset has to be local to the basin or the watershed or the distribution system from which you're drawing water, just because water impacts are so local. What I mean by that is, for instance, you work on leak detection. Pressure differences or water quality impacts on a distribution system, as we've seen in the news, with, for instance, Meta affecting the water system of a local utility, I think, in Wyoming. and in other places. What that tells you is that water impacts, whether quality related or quantity related or pressure related, are very localized. I'm concerned
They are.
about my local stream. I'm concerned about my local river and the impact that it has. Unfortunately, the way it has been implemented in the industry, and this is where all the skepticism comes from, they've implemented it, to your point, the way they did carbon credits at a global scale. When you hear companies saying you're 75% water positive, they could have intense operations in Virginia, and then all their offset programs are in India or in Singapore. And then you look at the global difference between your offsets and global difference between your withdrawals, and that number doesn't tell you much. So what our platform is trying to do is to bring some integrity into that system by making sure that, yes, you can make investments in water systems wherever you want, or in watershed related activities or water positive projects wherever you want. However, any offsets have to be local to the watershed where you're implementing it.
The data centers have not done a good job of quantifying how much they recycle or how much they use air cooled. They're sort of losing that PR war. The minute you're not transparent, right, you grow skepticism, and that's been an issue.
Yeah.
Do you see it getting better? Is there improvement now? Is there more transparency with the data centers?
So the trend has gone hand in hand with the level of transparency in terms of like community resistance. I worked at Amazon, and 2 years ago when I left, one of the parting messages I had from the leadership was, if we don't start being more transparent about our water consumption, we're going to lose social license to operate. And that message landed on very good ground, just because it's just really expensive to do interventions at the local level. So we already knew that water consumption was going to spike. Why? Because data center water use has been increasing exponentially over the last couple of years, especially this AI boom where you need a lot more water to cool these data centers. Water remains perhaps the only plausible way they can cool these data centers at that scale for the foreseeable future, particularly because of the big land requirements for the new data centers, or hyperscalers as they call them. So you had this sort of mismatch where you need a lot of land, you also need a lot of water, but the utilities just don't have the capacity, whether on the distribution system, on the purification, on the pumping, on the supply. And also in regions where there's water stress, whether that's ground or surface water extraction. So we already knew all that. And the smart thing to have done was to say, okay, we have to be transparent to the communities where we're establishing these data centers about our water consumption so that we can work collaboratively with them to meet that gap.
Companies decide for themselves what counts as an offset and what doesn't. In that vacuum, one industry has taken most of the public blame for the water problem.
The water offset market is not regulated. This is one of the challenges we have. Water offsets are one way to do it. Obviously, regulation is another way to do it. My view is that among the solutions that we have out there to ensure that large industrial water consumers, and by the way, I just want to say this for the public good, data centers are not even the largest water consumer. There's a perception out there that data centers are very large buildings. They're very large water consumers. What they are is the most pervasive, the fastest growing, the most profitable. I think that's where communities sort of have issues. And then there's a general sense that, AI is good to have. We're all using it. Cloud is good to have. We're all using it even in places you don't know. But it's not a human need, right? So why do you substitute my potable water for AI use? So those are some of the reasons I think there's opposition.
Even a company that wants to do this right runs into a wall. There's no agreed upon price for any of it. What should fixing a leak be worth compared to restoring a wetland? Nobody's landed on an answer.
You also have challenges with kind of determining price, right? Because on infrastructure, it's easier to do, but we can't get benchmarks on what a good price on a leak detection offset is against a non-revenue water offset is versus an upstream watershed-related offset is. We don't know what the price variability is or what is a good price for that. And then also regionally, we also don't have those numbers. Those are some of the challenges we are trying to address. The challenge has been for us is getting all the market participants to show up. It's easy to get inventory, to get folks like yourself, obviously, to do projects. But the market participant we need to show up is the buyer.
Some companies aren't waiting for this to get sorted out. They're setting public water targets on their own.
I'll give credit to industrial water users because they put themselves out there when they set up these water positive goals, right? Because then what it requires of you is to show progress towards completing your goal or exceeding it for that matter. So I'll give credit where it's due. So everyone is doing their own thing. Then what has happened is basically there's an ecosystem that has developed around that of accountants, or they call them watershed assurance partners, different large accounting firms like EY, Deloitte, I want to say PwC, but the sort of the big five accounting firms have really robust programs to help these companies sort of account. So they're telling us basically that because it's one of these large companies that has done our assurance, we should believe them. That's perfectly fine. The even better mechanism would be if it's transparent, right? Because then you can collectively work to benchmark what the actual prices should be. Last thing I'll say about transparency is specifically in the data center industry, but also other large industrial water users, just because of sort of public pressure, there's a lot of legislation across the country moving towards more transparency about water consumption, particularly for AI water use, but also the companies themselves responding by being more transparent about their water consumption at the local level.
And they have big goals. All of the major firms like Google and Meta and Microsoft and in that group, they all have expressed very large goals about being more water positive, these big levels that they're trying to meet, even within the next 3 years. So I think they are taking it very seriously. It's just trying to get all the pieces to fit together and still get their data center built, because we want to be the leader in AI. And I find it's interesting at some of these local township meetings that people will be getting up and railing against the data centers, but they got all of their information on ChatGPT. So you can't have it both ways.
No, you can. That's what the public is very good at. Is the public is very good at having it both ways. The thing I've tried to impart on particularly in the AI and cloud data center industry is don't rail against the public. You lose. If you try to either advise or tell them that why are you complaining and you use AI, they just take it as gaslighting because you're the biggest kahuna in the room. You have, deep pockets. You earn a lot of money from the services that you offer. In fact, if you look at the cost variability, the AI industry, what they've tried to do is basically two things. They've tried to tell the public that, we can use the water because you're the ones who are using the service. The public likes to have it both ways, right?
That's the picture now. Offsets that don't have to touch the same watershed they came from. A market with no regulation, so every company writes its own rules. The loudest fight is over data centers, while bigger water users face almost none of that scrutiny. And still, no agreed price, and not enough buyers willing to prove any of it works. I'm excited that we're both in this industry together and working to conserve. And actually, I always say wise water steward, because it's about conservation, but it's also about replenishment. It's about the highest and best use of water. So thank you so much for all your information, for your side of your viewpoint as someone in the forefront of helping preserve and protect this most precious resource that we have.
Yeah, thank you.
If this episode changed how you think about where your water offsets actually go, share it with someone who should hear it. Follow the Leak in the System wherever you listen, and I'll see you next episode.